in other sciences, they're often looking at different things, but we have a lot of connections between different disciplines that are often not noticed until there's communication between those groups. And I find that in my experience working on interdisciplinary research projects, there's a lot more overlap than we initially may think. And the more we talk about it and plan together, we can really reach expected and desired goals, and actually other unexpected goals that may come out of research once we start collaborating.
So today we led a session about the interplay between geologic processes and non-geologic processes in the Sonoran Desert. So we talked about how the landscape that is formed by millions of years of tectonics and erosion and rivers and volcanism, how that landscape, how that palette of the world, how that interacts with different sciences. We know that from plate tectonics, the Baja California Peninsula has moved over 300 kilometers to the northwest over the last 10 or 12 million years. That alone, having a sea wave flood into the middle of a continent, can help isolate species. And so we can start to think about how this plate tectonic motion between Baja California and Sonora and Sinaloa, how that motion isolates and separates animals and plant species. And we can evaluate and test whether we've actually seen evolutionary traits and evolutionary distinctions between species from one side of the Gulf to the other.
We had a session that was focusing on freshwater oases in the desert. And so there have been a number of kind of scattered studies of different aspects of these oases, both here in Sonora and then across the Gulf in Baja California. And a lot of the work in the past is focused on human use or cultural and historical uses of the water sources. So we wanted to bring all these different disciplines together so that we could see where we have good sources of knowledge, where there have been studies that have been done, what kind of biodiversity information we have, and then also identify the gaps. What types of animals or plants have we not studied from these oases, and what kind of studies do we need? And then the next step would be to bring together teams of people to fill those knowledge gaps that we identified during the session. And so, for example, we know a lot about the fishes that live in the oases in Baja California, but much less so here in Sonora. And the aquatic plants are well known in Baja California and not at all here in Sonora. And so we want to try to build smaller teams of all the people who are involved in the session, build some smaller teams to go out and actually do some of those biodiversity surveys.
As a scientist, you try to document the world that you see and observe as best you can. And you cannot fully capture the natural world with one lens, with one perspective. And when you integrate other sciences and other perspectives from other scientific fields or other fields of research, that allows you a much larger perspective on the outlook of the area you're understanding and the area you're studying.
I think an interdisciplinary approach to science is really valuable because within each of our disciplines, for example, within, say, aquatic entomology, we get very focused on kind of the minute questions, the little small issues and details about, say, the life cycle of a certain aquatic insect. And so having an interdisciplinary approach is for me, is an important reminder. I should be thinking about some of the bigger picture and bring in different perspectives to help me make the results of my research more valuable to people around me and to society in general. One of the biggest challenges to conducting this kind of interdisciplinary research is really just to get people to be able to speak a common language within each subdiscipline. That divide gets even worse when you move out of biology and into, say, talking to a hydrologist and trying to understand where the water comes from and what processes are regulating the amount of water that's there. And so they have a whole nother language, and the cultural anthropologists have a language. And so I think the biggest challenge is really finding the common language, getting people within different disciplines to be able to simplify how they talk about their research in a way that allows that kind of dialogue across disciplines.
One way to overcome that challenge of communication is starting from the beginning of a project, working together and establishing not only research objectives, but yeah, what's motivating this research and what the really important questions are. And if that communication starts early, I think that we could have a better or more successful research project.
As a researcher, you commonly spend a lot of time focusing on what your focus is. And so if you need to go, it's difficult sometimes to go out of your way to locate that information, to make that connection with someone who you're not used to talking with. Maybe you have a completely different vernacular, a different vocabulary than them. And that can be a hurdle for interdisciplinary science. But this meeting, NGen, this organization, is an excellent avenue to overcoming those problems.
The most important thing about the NGen Summit and how it's been helpful to my research here is in the OASES in particular is just providing a forum for different people and different groups to come together and interact in a way that they wouldn't in any other setting. But in general, I'm not going to come across a cultural anthropologist. I'm not going to come across a hydrologist. And if I do, it's going to be a very brief, in passing in a hallway in a university or something like that. And we're not going to have the time to really interact and exchange ideas and think about how we can build syntheses across these disciplines.
In the next 3 years, I see NGen moving forward and growing bigger and building very strong and lasting relationships amongst researchers. The first summit in 2012 initiated those relationships. And the special issue in the Journal of the Southwest is the blossom of those fruitful relationships. So that first meeting we had less than 100 people. This meeting we have over 200. And I can see the excitement and the passion of folks of several generations coming together, sharing their knowledge, and moving forward to understand this desert that we all love so much.
My long-term vision of the Sonoran Desert and the freshwater oases in particular, is one where we can strike a balance between the biodiversity we have, the species that live in and depend upon these oases, and the human cultures that have developed around them.
I would really like to see in the next few years even more attention brought to what we can all learn from each other and where there is overlap in the different types of research we do as geologists and ecologists and social scientists, because there really are a lot of common goals. And I'd really like to see more work that really involves this full-scale, holistic approach to what goes on in the desert and how to preserve it for future generations to study and appreciate.